Welcome to our deep dive into the world of repetition. It's something we encounter every day. Yet, it plays a huge role in how we learn, build habits, and even shape our preferences. We're going to explore not just how repetition works, but why it matters to you.
It really is incredible how repetition is this hidden force that shapes so much of our brains and our actions.
So let's start by understanding how our brains connect with repetition. We've all had that experience where we forget something we learned. What exactly is going on in our brains when that happens?
Well, each time we're exposed to new information, it leaves a kind of trace in our brains. But if that information isn't reinforced, those traces start to fade away. You can almost imagine it like a path in a forest that slowly disappears if no one walks on it. This is where repetition comes in. Each time we repeat something, it's like we're walking that path again, making it clearer and more lasting.
So repetition makes those neural pathways stronger and easier to access.
Exactly. And this whole process is based on a key principle in neuroscience called Hebb's rule. It basically says that neurons that fire together wire together, meaning the more we repeat an action or thought, the stronger the connection between the neurons involved becomes.
And that leads us to the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself.
Neuroplasticity really shows just how dynamic our brains are. Repetition isn't just strengthening existing connections, it's forming new ones too. It's like we're constantly sculpting our brains, shaping them through the actions and thoughts we repeat. Think about learning a new language. The more you practice, the stronger those language-related pathways in your brain get, and you become more fluent.
It's amazing to think that we can actually reshape our brains just by repeating things.
And this power goes beyond just learning and memory. It even affects our preferences and how we see the world.
Is that what the mere exposure effect is all about?
You got it. It's this tendency we have to develop a liking for things just because we encounter them repeatedly. Ever had a song you hated at first, but it grew on you after a few listens? Or those annoying ad jingles that get stuck in your head? That's the mere exposure effect at work.
It's subtle but powerful. We're constantly being shaped by what we're repeatedly exposed to, whether it's music, advertisements, or even the people we spend time with.
Makes you wonder, what are you repeatedly exposing yourself to, and how is that shaping your preferences, your views?
It really does. So let's talk about how repetition helps us master skills and form habits. There's this idea of the 10,000-hour rule, which says we need tons of practice to become an expert at something.
The exact number of hours is debatable, but the principle is spot on. To achieve mastery, you need consistent, focused repetition. Look at athletes, musicians, anyone who's really good at something. They've put in countless hours of practice.
It's not just about talent, it's about the power of consistent practice. They've honed their skills through countless repetitions.
Absolutely. Like a skilled surgeon, their precision and dexterity come from years of meticulously repeating procedures. It becomes second nature.
And it's not limited to just physical skills. Repetition shapes our mindsets and beliefs too.
Definitely. Regularly repeating positive affirmations or visualizing our goals can actually help change those self-limiting beliefs and develop a more growth-oriented mindset. It's like taking control of that sculptor's hand, intentionally shaping our internal world through deliberate repetition.
So we're training our brains to focus on what we want to achieve, making those thoughts and beliefs more dominant through repetition.
Exactly. It's connected to the reticular activating system, or RAS, a network in our brainstem that filters incoming information. When we repeatedly focus on specific thoughts or goals, we're basically telling our RAS to prioritize those signals, making them stand out more in our awareness.
So it's not just about memorizing facts or mastering skills, it's about shaping our perceptions and, in a way, our reality.
Repetition is a powerful force, and its influence stretches far beyond these more obvious examples. It impacts everything from our relationships to even healing emotional wounds.
Well, let's explore these less obvious areas where repetition plays a role.
Think about the core of strong relationships. They're built on those consistent positive actions repeated over time. It's those repeated acts of communication, kindness, and shared experiences that really strengthen those connections.
It's like those small, repeated gestures that build the foundation of a strong bond.
You got it. And when it comes to personal growth or spirituality, repetition is key there too. Practices like meditation or chanting mantras use repetition to influence consciousness and cultivate inner peace.
It's fascinating how something as simple as repeating a mantra or focusing on your breath can bring a sense of calm and clarity.
It really is. And even in the social and political landscape, repetition is a powerful tool. Politicians and influencers use repeated messages to sway public opinion and change behavior.
That brings up an important point, though. Doesn't that raise some ethical concerns about the use of repetition? It can be used for good, but it can also be used for manipulation and control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why critical thinking and being mindful of the messages we're constantly bombarded with are so crucial.
We need to be aware of how repetition, even unconsciously, can shape our beliefs.
Definitely. But even in the therapeutic realm, repetition can be incredibly powerful for healing. Trauma therapy often involves revisiting and processing difficult memories in a safe environment. By repeatedly confronting those experiences, individuals can gradually reduce their emotional intensity and regain control over their lives.
So in this context, repetition can be a way to rewrite the narrative around those traumatic memories, paving the way for healing and growth.
Exactly. It shows just how complex repetition is, its potential for both harm and healing. But we have to acknowledge that, like any powerful tool, it can be misused.
You're saying there's a point where repetition becomes counterproductive.
Exactly. Too much of a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
Excessive or mindless repetition can lead to mental fatigue, boredom, even desensitization. Imagine listening to the same song on repeat for hours. It goes from enjoyable to irritating.
It's like that feeling of ad fatigue. We see or hear the same ad so many times that we just tune it out completely. It loses its impact.
You got it. And this applies to skill development as well. Repeating a flawed technique over and over again just reinforces bad habits. It's about being mindful and intentional with our repetitions.
So it's not about mindlessly repeating, it's about mindful repetition combined with feedback and a willingness to adjust and improve.
Exactly. Recognizing those potential pitfalls and learning to harness its power effectively to facilitate learning, growth, and transformation.
This has been a really insightful look at the multifaceted nature of repetition. It affects our brains, our behavior, even how we see the world.
Repetition isn't just about memorizing, it's a powerful force that shapes who we are and who we become. Now, let's get practical. How can we use this power in our everyday lives? One technique that's super effective for boosting learning and remembering things is spaced repetition. It basically uses the way our brains naturally forget things to actually help us learn better.
So how does that work?
Well, it involves reviewing information at longer and longer intervals, giving the material a chance to kind of fade from memory a bit. That fading is actually really important because when we come back to it, our brains have to work harder to recall it, and that actually strengthens the memory trace.
So we're working with our brain's natural forgetting process instead of trying to fight it.
Right. By spacing out our repetitions, we create a more lasting memory. It's way more effective than cramming, where you're just trying to force a bunch of information into your brain at once, and then it just disappears.
Like trying to fill a leaky bucket. The information just doesn't stay in.
Perfect analogy. Spaced repetition is more like building a solid foundation, brick by brick. Makes that structure of knowledge much stronger, more permanent.
How can we actually put spaced repetition into practice, though, in our daily learning routines?
There are lots of apps and programs out there that can help with spaced repetition, but even without those, you can do it manually. Let's say you're learning a new language. You could review new vocabulary words the day you learn them, then again after a few days, then a week later, and so on. Each review just reinforces the memory, makes it harder to forget.
It's all about the timing then, those strategic repetitions.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's talk about habit formation, because that's a huge part of personal growth, and repetition is a key player there as well. One really powerful technique is called habit stacking. It basically uses association to our advantage.
That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So imagine you want to start meditating every day. You could stack this new habit onto an existing one, something you already do without thinking, like brushing your teeth. Right after you brush your teeth each morning, you meditate for 5 minutes. By linking the new habit to something you already do regularly, you create this strong trigger for consistent practice.
So you're taking advantage of the automatic nature of an existing habit to help you build a new one.
Exactly. Over time, those two actions become more and more connected, and the new habit becomes part of your routine. And this same principle can actually be used to break bad habits, too.
So how does repetition come into play when you're trying to break a bad habit?
Well, breaking a bad habit is often about replacing it with a better one, and that's where repetition comes in. By consistently choosing the new positive behavior instead of the old one, you're slowly rewiring your brain. Those neural pathways associated with the old habit weaken, while the pathways for the new healthy behavior become stronger.
So it's about consciously disrupting the old pattern and replacing it with a new one over and over again.
Exactly. It's important to remember this takes time and effort. You're going to have slip-ups along the way. But instead of seeing those as failures, see them as learning opportunities. It's all part of the process.
It sounds like self-compassion is key here, remembering that we're all works in progress and that those setbacks are normal.
Totally agree. Now let's talk about affirmations, because they use the power of repetition to change those subconscious beliefs that might be holding us back.
Affirmations have become really popular. What's the science behind them? How do they actually work?
Well, affirmations are basically positive statements that we repeat to ourselves to reprogram our minds at a deeper level. And the reason they work is that our brains tend to believe what we tell them repeatedly, even if those statements don't match up with our current beliefs or experiences at first.
It's like planting positive seeds in our subconscious minds.
I love that analogy. And by consistently repeating those affirmations, we're nurturing those seeds, allowing them to take root and gradually shift those limiting beliefs we have about ourselves.
Are there certain ways to use affirmations that make them more effective?
The most important thing is to choose affirmations that truly resonate with you. They need to feel genuine and align with your values. It's also important to phrase them in the present tense as if they're already true. So instead of saying, I will be confident, you'd say, I am confident.
So it's about using language to embody that desired state.
You got it. And lastly, don't be afraid to put some emotion into it. The more feeling you put into those affirmations, the more powerful they become.
It's not just about saying the words, it's about believing them, feeling them.
Exactly. Let's move on to skill development. Repetition is essential for getting better at pretty much any skill.
So how can we use repetition to enhance our skill acquisition?
Deliberate practice is key. This is about focused, intentional repetition with the clear goal of constant improvement. It's not just going through the motions, it's about being present in the process, pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone and seeking feedback to make adjustments.
It's like approaching repetition with a growth mindset, seeing each repetition as a chance to learn and improve.
Exactly. Think of a musician practicing a difficult piece. They don't just play it over and over again mindlessly. They'll break it down into sections, figure out the tricky parts, and really focus their practice on those specific spots.
It's about being strategic, right? Targeting those repetitions to areas that need the most work.
You got it. It's about quality over quantity, making sure each repetition is intentional and moves you closer to mastery.
This has been a really practical look at how we can use repetition. Any final thoughts before we move on?
Repetition is a powerful tool, but it's not magic. It takes consistency, intentionality, and a willingness to embrace that process of learning and growth.
It's about understanding how our brains work and using repetition as a way to create positive change.
Exactly. It's about understanding how repetition shapes us and using that knowledge to build the lives we want.
Now let's explore some of the more complex, perhaps even controversial aspects of repetition in the final part of our deep dive. So we've explored how multifaceted repetition is, how it affects our brains, our habits, even how we see the world. But let's get into some of the maybe less talked about aspects of repetition, the more controversial sides of it.
Repetition can be a powerful force for good, but, it can also have a darker side. It can be used to manipulate, to control, to instill fear even, and to perpetuate ideologies that are harmful.
Let's start with how repetition plays a role in trauma. We talked about its potential for healing, but it seems like a delicate process that needs to be approached carefully.
Absolutely. Trauma survivors often experience things like intrusive memories, flashbacks. These are basically forms of involuntary repetition that can be really disturbing. But in a therapeutic context, revisiting these traumatic memories, but in a safe and controlled environment, can actually help people process those experiences and regain a sense of agency.
So not about reliving the trauma over and over again, it's about reframing it, integrating it into a new narrative.
Exactly. By confronting those difficult memories repeatedly, but in a safe space, people can gradually lessen their emotional impact and start to create new neural pathways that are associated with healing and resilience.
That really highlights how important it is to seek professional help when dealing with trauma. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about persuasion and influence. Repetition has been a tool used in propaganda and marketing for ages to shape public opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Think about those catchy political slogans or those advertising jingles that get stuck in your head. They're often effective because they're simple and they're repeated constantly. By bombarding us with a message over and over again, even if it's a simple one, they're trying to bypass our critical thinking and tap into those subconscious desires and fears we all have.
It's almost like a subtle form of manipulation. It plays on how our brains naturally make connections and find meaning in things we see or hear repeatedly.
Exactly, and that's why being media literate, being able to think critically, is so crucial. Especially now, with how much information we're exposed to every day, we need to be aware of how repetition can be used to influence our opinions and behaviors, whether we realize it or not.
It's about questioning those messages, recognizing that just because something is repeated doesn't mean it's true or valid.
Right. Now let's think about creativity. Repetition is essential for mastering any skill or technique. But is there a point where it actually hinders innovation, stifles originality?
That's an interesting question because on one hand, repetition leads to mastery. You get this deep understanding and ability in your craft. But on the other hand, it can lead to complacency. You might become hesitant to step outside of what's familiar.
That's the balance, isn't it? Creativity often comes from breaking patterns, from questioning assumptions, exploring new perspectives. Repetition can be great for honing skills, but we need to be open to experimenting, to the unknown, to making mistakes even.
It's about finding that sweet spot between refinement and exploration, mastery and innovation.
Exactly. Recognizing that repetition can help us grow, but it can also be a roadblock to creative expression if we're not careful.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of repetition, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Repetition is everywhere. It's part of what makes us human, and it affects our brains, our actions, and how we understand the world around us in profound ways. It can be a force for good or for bad, for healing or for harm, for freedom or for control.
The key is to understand its power and to use it consciously with intention.
Absolutely. As you go about your day, as you go through life, think about the role repetition plays in your own experiences. What habits are you reinforcing? What messages are you absorbing? What skills are you honing?
Every time you repeat something, you're shaping your reality, you're molding your mind, and you're influencing the world around you, even in small ways.
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? May this awareness help you harness the power of repetition to create positive change. Become the architect of your own life.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of repetition. We hope you found it insightful. Until next time, may your repetitions be mindful, may they be purposeful, may they enrich your lives.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Deep Thoughts Podcast. I hope you found insights and inspiration to take with you on your journey of self-growth. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated on new releases and exclusive content. See you next time, where we'll continue to help you grow and explore your full potential.